Deep in the pine forests of the Canadian Rockies, 80-year-old Eleanor has found her true home. She left behind a heartbreak 60 years ago, trading the noise of the world for the healing silence of the mountains. Now, in this quiet cabin, she spends her days in simple devotion, finding peace in her connection with the divine. But what happened 60 years ago to change her path so completely? Why did she choose to leave everything behind for a life of solitude? And how did a single letter rewrite her entire destiny? To understand her peace, we must first understand her journey. So let's leave the busy world behind for a while, take a deep breath, and let us step inside the cottage by the whispering pines. If you were to drive north past the busy cities and the winding highways, past the towns where the street lights hum all night, you would eventually find a narrow gravel road. This road winds its way up into the foothills, disappearing into a dense embrace of pine and spruce trees. It is a road that few people travel, and that is exactly how Eleanor likes it. High up in this secluded valley, surrounded by the protective arms of the mountains, sits a small, solitary cottage. It is a humble structure, 1 story high, built from cedar wood that has turned a soft silver grey over the decades. It looks as though it grew right out of the earth, rooted and steady. This is where Eleanor lives. She is 80 years old now. Her hair is the colour of snow, tied loosely back, and her face holds the map of a long life. Lines that speak of smiles, of thought, and of a peace that was hard won. It is late afternoon in the valley. The sun is beginning its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the mountains, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple, burnt orange, and a fading, gentle blue. The air here is crisp and clean, smelling of pine needles and the damp, rich earth. Eleanor stands on her front porch. She is wrapped in a thick, hand-knitted wool cardigan, the colour of oatmeal, which keeps the mountain chill at bay. She leans one hand against the wooden railing, a railing she sanded and stained herself many years ago. The wood feels cool and solid beneath her palm. She isn't waiting for anyone. She isn't looking for a car to come up the drive. She is simply watching the light change. For the last several decades, this view has been her entire world, and to some, a life of such solitude might seem lonely. But to Eleanor, this solitude is not empty. It is full. It is full of the sound of the wind moving through the treetops, a sound that mimics the ocean. It is full of the chatter of the squirrels hiding their nuts for the coming winter and the distant call of a hawk circling the thermal currents above. She steps off the porch and onto the soft ground. Her boots make a crunching sound on the fallen leaves. She walks slowly. At 80, there is no need to rush. The urgency of youth, the need to be somewhere else, faded from her heart a long time ago. She makes her way to the side of the house. Here she has cultivated a small garden. It isn't manicured or perfect. It is wild and free, just like the forest around it. There are hardy herbs, rosemary, sage and thyme, releasing their scent as her skirt brushes against them. Next to the main cottage stands another structure. It is smaller, simpler. Eleanor built this too with the help of a few locals many years ago. It is a single room with large windows facing the east. She calls it her sanctuary. In the village down in the valley, they know Eleanor as the quiet woman on the hill. They know she is kind but distant. They know she has had offers to move into town, to be closer to people, to perhaps share her life with someone, but she always declines with a gentle, knowing smile. Her heart belongs to this silence. She approaches the sanctuary door. It is made of solid oak. She pushes it open and the hinges do not creak. They are well oiled and cared for. Inside, the room is sparse. There is no furniture, save for a few thick, comfortable cushions on the floor and a low wooden table. The floor is polished wood, glowing in the dimming light. This is where she spends her days and her evenings. It is her place of worship, though not in a loud or performative way. It is a worship of silence, of gratitude, of connecting with the creator of these mountains and these stars. She steps inside and leaves the door slightly ajar, letting the fresh mountain air mingle with the scent of beeswax candles inside. She strikes a match, the sound sharp and brief, and lights a single candle on the low table. The flame flickers. then steadies, casting a warm golden glow that dances on the timber walls. Eleanor lowers herself onto a cushion. Her movements are slow, deliberate. Her joints are stiff, reminding her of the passage of time of 60 years gone by since the events that brought her here. But she feels no pain, only a dull, comfortable awareness of her body. She closes her eyes. Here in this room, the silence is heavy and comforting. It feels like a warm blanket draped over her shoulders as she takes a deep breath. Inhale, smelling the pine and the candle wax. Exhale, releasing the last of the day's light. She sits for a long time. Her mind is not racing. It is like a calm lake reflecting the sky. Thoughts drift by like clouds, slow, white and formless. She thinks of the firewood stacked outside, ready for the winter. She thinks of the tea she will brew later, chamomile and honey. She remembers the girl she once was 60 years ago, a girl of 20, full of fire and dreams, living in a bustling university town far away from these mountains. That girl feels like a distant relative now, someone she once knew but hasn't seen in a lifetime. That girl had plans. She had a heart ready to be given away. But that is a story for the whispering wind, a memory stored in the sepia tones of the past. Tonight there is only Eleanor, the woman of the mountain. Outside, the sun has fully dipped below the horizon and the sky is transitioning into a deep, velvety navy blue. The first star appears bright and unwavering. It is Venus, the evening star. Eleanor opens her eyes and watches it through the window. She feels a profound sense of contentment. She needs nothing more than this. No grand parties, no complex relationships, no noise. She has her house built with her own resilience. She has her sanctuary where she whispers her prayers to the universe. She stands up slowly, blowing out the candle. The smoke rises in a thin grey ribbon, disappearing into the rafters. Leaving the sanctuary, she walks back to the main cottage. The temperature has dropped. A light frost is beginning to form on the grass, glittering like diamond dust in the moonlight. Inside her cottage, it is warm. She has a small wood stove in the corner of the living room. She opens the iron door and places a log inside. The fire crackles and pops, embracing the wood, and the orange light flickers across the room, illuminating the shelves lined with old books, the comfortable armchair with its worn velvet fabric, and the hand-woven rug on the floor. She moves to her small kitchen. She fills the kettle with water and places it on the stove. The rhythmic sound of the water beginning to boil is a familiar, cosy lullaby. She selects a ceramic mug, one she made herself in a pottery class decades ago. It is imperfect, slightly lopsided, but it fits perfectly in her hands. As she waits for the tea, she looks out the kitchen window. The world outside is now dark, save for the moonlight washing over the pine trees, turning them into silent sentinels guarding her peace. She pours the water over the tea leaves. The steam rises, warming her face. She wraps her hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into her palms. Eleanor walks to her armchair and sits down. The house is utterly silent, except for the comforting snaps of the fire and the occasional settling of the wooden beams. This house breathes with her. It protects her. She takes a sip of tea. It is warm and soothing. She thinks about how far she has come. From the chaos of youth to the stillness of age, she thinks about the decision she made so long ago to step away from the path everyone expected her to take and to forge this path of solitude. It wasn't an escape, she realises now. It was a return to herself. Her eyelids feel heavy. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of the tea, the safety of the cottage, it all invites her to rest. She sets the mug down on the side table. She pulls a soft knitted blanket over her lap. She watches the flames dance behind the glass of the stove. Yellow, orange, red. Flicker, glow, fade. The memories of the past are there, sleeping in the corners of her mind. The professor, the letter, the heartbreak that felt like it would end the world. They are there, but they have no teeth anymore. They cannot bite. They are just stories, old, faded stories. Tonight, she is just Eleanor, safe in her cottage by the whispering pines. The wind outside picks up slightly, brushing against the walls of the house. It sounds like a hush. Shh, shh. The trees are singing her to sleep. The mountains are holding her safe. She closes her eyes, ready to drift, ready to let the peace of the present moment wash over her completely. Everything is okay. Everything is exactly where it is meant to be. And as she drifts towards sleep, the only thing that remains is the quiet, the beautiful, healing quiet. The year is 1964. It is a time of change, a time of energy, but here in this university town, the world feels suspended in a golden haze. Imagine a place where the buildings are made of red brick and grey stone, draped in thick curtains of ivy that turn crimson in the fall. The trees, mighty oaks and maples, line the wide sidewalks, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy of gold and rust. Here we find Eleanor. But she is not the white-haired woman of the mountain. She is 20 years old. She's walking across the campus green. The air is crisp, the kind of autumn chill that demands a thick coat and a warm scarf. She is wearing a plaid skirt and a beige trench coat, clutching a stack of leather-bound books against her chest. Her hair is dark, full of life, bouncing slightly with every step she takes. There is a lightness to her step, a rhythm of anticipation. She is young. And to be young is to believe that the world is waiting just for you. Her destination is the literature department, a grand old building with tall arched windows. This is where he is. Let us call him Professor Sterling. To Eleanor's 20-year-old eyes, he was not just a man, he was an ideal. He was older, distinguished, with streaks of grey beginning to touch his temples. He wore tweed jackets that smelled of pipe tobacco and chalk dust. When he spoke about poetry, about the great romances of the past, the entire lecture hall would fall silent, hanging on his every word. Eleanor was his student, but she had become something more. In the quiet corners of the campus, in the hushed rows of the library stacks, a bond had formed. It was a relationship built on whispered conversations and shared glances. It was a secret world, fragile and thrilling. They would meet in the afternoons when the light was long and golden. They would walk by the river that bordered the town, watching the water flow over the smooth stones. "You have a poet's soul, Eleanor," he would say, his voice low and reassuring. And Eleanor, with the innocence of a flower opening to the sun, believed him. She believed that this connection was the anchor of her life. She believed that the future was a straight, clear path that she would walk alongside him. But youth is often accompanied by a shadow, the shadow of insecurity. When you love something too much, you become afraid of losing it. You begin to look for cracks in the foundation, even when there are none to be seen. It was a Tuesday in late October. The rain had been falling all morning, a gentle, steady drizzle that turned the campus into a watercolour painting of grey and green. Eleanor was sitting in a small cafe near the university gates. The windows were steamed up, shielding the patrons from the damp world outside. She was with her friend, Clara. Clara was bold, full of daring ideas and mischievous laughter. They sat across from each other, nursing cups of hot cocoa, watching the rain streak against the glass. "How do you know?" Clara asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "How do you know he is truly devoted to only you? He is a man of the world, Eleanor. A professor. There are many students who look at him with wide eyes." Eleanor looked down at her cup. The thought hadn't formed until that moment, but once spoken, it took root, a tiny seed of doubt. I suppose I trust him," Eleanor said, though her voice wavered. Clara leaned in, her eyes sparkling with a reckless idea. "Let's find out. Let's play a game, just a harmless little test." And so the plan was born. It was a plan constructed with the foolish confidence of youth. I will write him a letter, Clara suggested. I will pretend to be a past admirer, someone from another city. I will write to him with affection, asking him to return to me. If he ignores it or if he shows it to you, then you know his heart is true. But if he replies, it seemed so simple in the warm, cosy atmosphere of the coffee shop with the jazz music playing softly in the background and the smell of rain outside. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a storybook plot. Eleanor hesitated. She looked out the window at the falling leaves. Every leaf that fell was a decision made, a moment passing that could never be retrieved. "Okay," Eleanor whispered, "write it." That evening, the letter was written. It was penned on beautiful, cream-coloured stationery. The words were carefully chosen to be tempting, offering a bridge to a past that didn't exist. It was signed with a pseudonym, a name that sounded mysterious and alluring. They mailed it the next morning. Eleanor remembers the sound of the metal mailbox clanging shut. Clang, a sound of finality. The days that followed were a blur of nervous energy. The autumn winds seemed to blow colder. The campus, usually so welcoming, felt vast and indifferent. Eleanor attended his lectures, watching him from her seat in the third row. She watched his hands as he turned the pages of his book. She watched his eyes as he scanned the room. Does he know? Has he received it? 3 days later, the reply came. It was not sent to Eleanor, of course. It was sent to the return address Clara had used, a post office box in the neighbouring town. Clara brought the letter to Eleanor's dorm room. The envelope was thick, formal. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his. The room was quiet. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall and the beating of Eleanor's own heart, which felt like a bird trapped in a cage. She took the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't open it immediately. She held it, feeling the weight of the paper. Inside this envelope lay the truth. Inside lay the answer that would define the rest of her life. She used a small silver letter opener to slice the paper. The sound was a sharp tear in the silence. She unfolded the letter. The sunlight from the window fell across the page, illuminating the blue ink. He had replied. And he had not rejected the admirer. The words swam before Eleanor's eyes. He wrote with a passion she recognised, but it was directed at a stranger. He wrote of a desire to reconnect. He wrote that his current life, his current distractions, implying Eleanor herself, were merely temporary. He invited the stranger to meet him. He offered to leave his current path to pursue this new, mysterious possibility. In that moment, the world did not explode. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic thunderstorm. Instead, there was a profound, deafening silence. It was the sound of an illusion shattering. Like a glass vase dropped on a carpet, it broke quietly, but completely. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed. She looked out the window at the great oak tree in the courtyard. A single yellow leaf detached itself from a high branch and floated down, twisting and turning in the air until it landed softly on the grass. She felt a strange sensation wash over her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hate, though that would come later and then fade. It was clarity. It was the sudden, absolute realisation that the pedestal she had built for him was empty. The god she worshipped was just a man, and a flawed one at that. The love she thought was a cathedral was actually just a house of cards, and the wind of truth had just blown it down. She folded the letter. She placed it back in the envelope. In that quiet dorm room, surrounded by her books and her youth, Eleanor grew up. The girl of 20, the girl who needed someone else to define her worth, began to fade away. The pain was there, a dull ache in the centre of her chest, but beneath the pain was the beginning of resolve. She stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting, casting long, melancholy shadows across the brick buildings. The campus looked different now. It looked smaller. She knew with a certainty that chilled her bones that she would never marry him. She knew she would never walk by the river with him again. But more than that, a thought planted itself in her soul. a thought that would guide her for the next 60 years. If human hearts are this fickle, she thought, if promises are this easily broken, then I shall find a love that does not waver. She didn't know yet that this path would lead her to a mountaintop, to a mosque built of cedar, to a life of solitude and prayer. She only knew that the chapter of Professor Sterling was over. The scene begins to fade now. The red brick buildings turn to mist. The golden leaves of 1964 dissolve into the darkness. The young girl in the trench coat standing by the window becomes a silhouette, and then nothing. We drift back through the years, back through the decades, away from the pain of youth, away from the confusion of the world. We return to the cottage. The fire is still glowing warm and steady. The old woman, Eleanor, shifts slightly in her chair. A faint smile touches her lips in her sleep. She has made peace with that girl from the past. She has forgiven the professor. She has forgiven herself. It is just a story now, a sepia-toned memory pressed between the pages of a book she no longer reads. The room is warm. The shadows are soft. You are safe here. The past cannot touch you. It is only a cloud passing across the moon. After reading the letter, the one written by the man she thought she knew, to a woman who didn't even exist, Eleanor did not cry. There is a specific kind of silence that comes after a great shock. It is not an empty silence. It is a heavy one. It is the silence of a library after all the books have been removed. She sat in her room as the afternoon light faded into the blue-grey of twilight. She looked at the letter on her desk. The handwriting, once so beloved, now looked like foreign symbols. It looked like a map to a place she no longer wanted to visit. In many stories, this is the moment for rage. This is the moment for shouting matches in the rain, for demanding answers. But Eleanor felt something different. She felt a sudden, overwhelming desire for stillness. She realised that the love she had been chasing was like trying to hold water in her hands. The tighter she squeezed, the more it slipped away, and she was tired. She was so very tired of the chase. The next morning, Eleanor woke up before the sun. The campus was asleep. The stone buildings were shrouded in a thick white mist that rolled in from the river. She made a decision. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a decision made with the clarity of the morning frost. She would not marry, not him and not anyone else. The idea, which might seem frightening to some, settled over Eleanor like a warm, protective cloak. She saw the lives of the people around her, the frantic search for approval, the twisting and turning to fit into someone else's life, the little lies told to keep the peace. I am done with that, she whispered to the empty room. She didn't go to his class that day, or the next. Instead, she began to pack. There is something deeply soothing about the act of packing, when you know you are leaving a place that no longer fits you. Eleanor moved slowly. She took her clothes from the wardrobe, the wool skirts, the soft sweaters, the scarves. She folded them neatly, smoothing out the wrinkles with her hands. Fold, smooth, pack, fold, smooth, pack. With every item she placed in her trunk, she felt lighter. She was packing away the girl who needed approval. She was packing away the expectations of society. She took the letter, the proof of his fickleness, and she didn't burn it. She simply placed it in a drawer of the desk she was leaving behind. She left it there, a forgotten artifact. It had no power over her anymore. It was just paper and ink. She wrote a brief note to the university administration, withdrawing from her courses. She didn't offer a complex explanation. She simply stated that she was called elsewhere. And then she left. She didn't say goodbye to him. To see him would be to acknowledge that he still held power. By leaving in silence, she reclaimed her own soul. She boarded a train heading north. Imagine the rhythm of the train. Clack, clack, whoosh, clack, clack, whoosh. It is a hypnotic sound, a lullaby of motion. Eleanor sat by the window, her forehead resting against the cool glass. She watched the landscape change. The brick buildings and paved roads of the city gave way to suburbs, and then the suburbs gave way to open fields. The fields were brown and gold, resting after the harvest. The trees became denser, darker. She was heading toward the mountains, towards the place where the air was thin and clear. As the train climbed higher, the rain turned to snow. It was the first snow of the season. Soft, large flakes drifted down from a slate grey sky. They landed on the evergreen trees, dusting them like powdered sugar. They covered the ground in a blanket of pristine white. Eleanor felt her heart expanding. The higher she went, the easier it was to breathe. The complicated knots in her chest began to loosen. The train arrived at a small remote station in the foothills. This was the end of the line. She stepped onto the platform and the air was bitingly cold, but it felt cleansing. It smelled of ice and pine resin. It smelled of truth. She had some savings, money left to her by a grandmother she barely remembered. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy a small piece of land that nobody else wanted. She found a local realtor, a quiet man who drove an old truck, and he drove her up a winding gravel road far away from the village. "It's isolated," the man warned her, looking at her young face with concern. "There's nothing up there but trees and rocks. No neighbours for miles. The winters are hard." Eleanor looked out the windshield at the towering pines. "It sounds perfect," she said softly. They arrived at the plot of land. It was a small clearing on the side of a mountain, overlooking the vast valley below. There was no house there yet, just the foundation of an old structure that had long since crumbled. Eleanor stepped out of the truck. Her boots sank into the snow. She looked around. To the west, the great peaks of the Rockies pierced the clouds. To the east, the forest stretched out endlessly, a sea of green and white. There was no sound, no cars, no voices, no demands. Just the wind whispering through the needles of the fir trees. Shh. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time in months, the tight coil of anxiety in her stomach unspooled completely. She knew with a certainty that resonated in her bones that she would never return to the life she had left. She felt a presence here, not a person, but something greater. She had been raised with religion, but she had always found the churches too loud and too crowded. Here, under the open sky, she felt close to the divine. She felt close to God in a way she never had before. "I will take it," she told the man. He looked at her surprised. "You're sure a young woman like you? Alone?" Eleanor smiled. It was a genuine smile, and one that reached her eyes. "I am not alone," she said. "I have all of this." She gestured to the mountains. The deal was done. She stayed in a small boarding house in the village while she made arrangements. She hired a local carpenter to help her build. She didn't want a mansion. She wanted a shelter. She drew the plans herself on a piece of napkin. One main room for living, a small kitchen, a warm hearth, and next to it, a separate space, a quiet room for prayer and meditation. People in the village whispered, of course. They wondered why a beautiful girl of 20 would retreat from the world. Was she heartbroken? Was she hiding? They didn't understand that she wasn't hiding from life. She was moving deeper into it. She remembers the day she stood on the land, marking out the corners of where her house would be. It was late November now. The snow was deeper. She took a handful of the earth, cold and damp, and held it in her palm. "This is my anchor," she thought. The hatred she had felt for the deception, for the professor, for the game, for the lie, had evaporated. It was too heavy to carry up the mountain, so she had left it down in the valley. Up here, there was only room for essential things: wood, water, fire, silence. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known. She wasn't just building a house, she was building a sanctuary for her soul. She was building a fortress where the chaos of the world could not enter. The wind picked up, swirling the snow around her ankles. It was cold, yes, but it was a clean cold. It was a cold that made you feel alive. She looked up at the grey sky. A single hawk glided silently overhead, riding the thermal currents, unbothered by the cold, unbothered by the loneliness. "I will be like you," Eleanor whispered to the bird. She turned back to the carpenter who was waiting by his truck. "Let's begin," she said. And so the hammering began. The sound echoed through the valley. Thud, thud, thud. A rhythm of creation. Eleanor helped. She learned to saw wood. She learned to mix mortar. Her hands, once soft from turning the pages of books, became rough and strong. She got splinters, she got blisters, and she loved every one of them. They were badges of her freedom. As the walls of her cottage began to rise, framing the view of the mountains, Eleanor felt the last of her old self slipping away. The girl who wanted to be a professor's wife was gone. In her place stood a woman of the woods, a woman who found romance not in the words of men, but in the rising of the sun and the turning of the seasons. She was 20 years old, but she felt ancient and new all at once. The scene holds there for a moment. The young Eleanor, standing in the snow, watching the frame of her future home rise against the backdrop of the eternal mountains. The image begins to blur. The sound of the hammer fades into the distance. The white snow softens into a haze. We drift back to the present, back to the 80-year-old Eleanor, safe in that very same house 60 years later. The walls she built then are the walls that shelter her now. The wood has aged just as she has. They have weathered the storms together. She shifts in her chair, a deep sigh of relaxation escaping her lips. The firelight dances on her face. Oh, she doesn't regret the letter. In a way, she is grateful for it. That letter was the key that unlocked the cage. It was the wind that blew her here to this place of perfect peace. To this place where she can sleep without worry, where she can rest without fear. The room is so quiet now. The only sound is the gentle breathing of the house itself. You are safe here with her. The journey is over. The destination has been reached. Time in the mountains does not move in hours or minutes. It moves in seasons. It moves in the slow growth of the rings inside a tree trunk. For Eleanor, the first few years were a time of building. She had hired help for the heavy lifting, yes, but she was there for every moment of it. She wanted her hands to know the texture of her home. Imagine the smell of fresh cut cedar. It is a sharp, clean scent, peppery and sweet. It clears the mind. Eleanor spent her days surrounded by this scent. She learned the grain of the wood. She learned that pine is soft and yielding, while oak is stubborn and strong. She sanded the floorboards of her cottage until they were as smooth as satin. Push and pull, push and pull. The repetitive motion was a meditation. With every stroke of the sandpaper, she was smoothing out the rough edges of her own heart. But the most important work was the second structure, the small building next to the cottage. She called it the sanctuary. It was simple, 4 walls, a high slanted roof to let the snow slide off, and a door facing the valley. She wanted it to be a place of pure connection. She decided there would be no electric lights in the sanctuary, only natural lights. She installed a large window facing east toward the rising sun. In the mornings, the first golden rays would pierce through the glass and illuminate the bare wooden floor, and she installed a window facing west to catch the dying light of the day. Inside, she placed no furniture, no pews, no altars, no statues, just a thick hand-woven rug from the local market. The rug was deep red and navy blue, with intricate patterns that looked like vines and stars. When the last nail was driven and the last layer of varnish was dry, Eleanor stepped inside. The room smelled of beeswax and timber. It was silent, so silent that she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She knelt down on the rug. She touched her forehead to the floor. She wasn't praying for anything specific. She wasn't asking for love or money or forgiveness. She was simply offering herself to the silence. She was saying, I am here. I am listening. And in that silence, she felt a presence, a warmth that wrapped around her like a blanket. It was the presence of the Creator, the one who sculpted the mountains outside and the heart inside her chest. This became her life. The years began to flow like a gentle river. Decades passed. Eleanor's hair, once dark as a raven's wing, began to streak with silver. She became a part of the landscape. The people in the village down in the valley spoke of her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. They called her the Lady of the Pines. Every Tuesday, she would drive her old truck down the winding road to the village market. She would buy flour, oil, tea and candles. She was beautiful. In a quiet, austere way, her eyes were clear and bright, reflecting the sky she looked at every day. And naturally, because the world struggles to understand solitude, there were men who tried to change her mind. There was Thomas, the owner of the general store. He was a kind man, a widower with a gentle laugh. He would always put an extra jar of honey in her bag. One autumn afternoon, as he helped her load the groceries into her truck, he stopped. He looked at her, his hat in his hands. "Eleanor," he said softly, "the winters are long up there. It is. It is a lot of silence for one person. You know, I have a warm house. I have a good life. You wouldn't have to be alone." It was a proposal, sweet and sincere. Eleanor looked at him. She looked at the kindness in his face. 60 years ago, a younger Eleanor might have been flattered. She might have thought, finally, someone to take care of me. But the Eleanor standing by the truck simply smiled. It was a smile void of any bitterness. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, her voice as calm as a mountain lake. "You are a good man, but I am not alone." But, he started. She gently placed a hand on his arm. "My heart is already full. I have my home, I have my silence, and I have my commitment to the one who made all of this." She gestured to the glowing orange peaks of the mountains in the distance. "I cannot marry you, Thomas. I am already married to this peace." She drove away, leaving him standing there. She didn't feel sad. She felt lighter. Every rejection of the conventional life was a reaffirmation of her own path. She had decided long ago in that dorm room that she would never again give the keys to her happiness to another human being. Humans were fragile. They changed. They left. But the mountains, they remained. The stars, they returned every night. The silence of God, it was eternal. So she returned to her cottage. Her routine became a sacred ritual. Morning. She would wake before the sun. The world outside would be blue and grey. She would wrap herself in her thick wool shawl and walk across the frosted grass to the sanctuary. The air would be freezing, waking up her skin. Inside the sanctuary, she would light a single candle. She would sit in the centre of the rug and wait for the sun. As the first light hit the eastern window, she would begin her prayers, whispered words of gratitude. "Thank you for the breath in my lungs. Thank you for the roof over my head. Thank you for the safety of this day." Afternoon. She worked. She chopped wood, the rhythmic thwack of the axe echoing against the trees. She tended to her garden, her hands deep in the dark soil, planting potatoes, carrots and herbs. She felt connected to the earth. She was not just living on it, she was living with it. Evening. She would read. She read the mystics, Rumi, Hafiz, St. Francis, Thoreau. She felt a kinship with them. They were her friends, her dinner companions. They understood what the rest of the world did not, that in silence you find everything. The seasons cycle through. Winter brought the heavy snows, turning her world into a white, muffled dreamscape. She would stay indoors for days, feeding the fire, watching the snowflakes pile up against the window panes. It was a time of hibernation, of deep rest. Spring brought the melt. The sound of dripping water was everywhere. Drip, drip, rush. The creek would swell. The deer would bring their fawns to the edge of the clearing. Eleanor would watch them, motionless, until they trusted her enough to graze near her porch. Summer brought the long days. The sun wouldn't set until late. The air smelled of heated pine needles and wild sage. She would sit on her porch and watch the thunderstorms roll in, great curtains of rain sweeping across the valley. Autumn brought the colour. The aspen trees would turn a brilliant, trembling gold. The air would crisp up. It was the anniversary of her arrival, the anniversary of her freedom. She never felt the hate for the professor anymore. That emotion had long since composted into the soil of her life, helping new things to grow. He was just a character in a prologue. The real story was here. She built a small fountain near the sanctuary, diverting a tiny stream from the mountain spring. The sound of the water, burble, splash, flow, was a constant background music to her prayers. She realised that she had built a kingdom. It was small, yes, just a few acres, but it was hers, and it was ruled by peace. As we watch her now through the lens of history, we see a woman who didn't shrink from the world, but who expanded into the universe. She is walking back from the sanctuary to the cottage now. It is twilight in the story, just as it is twilight in her life. She pauses to look up. The Milky Way is beginning to unfurl across the sky, a river of diamonds. She feels a profound sense of satisfaction. The house is sturdy, the wood is dry, the pantry is full, the heart is calm. She opens the door to her cottage. The warmth rushes out to greet her. She steps inside and closes the door, shutting out the cold, shutting out the vastness of the night. She is safe. She is home. The walls she built with her own hands hold her. The silence she cultivated holds her. 80 years. It is a significant number. It is a vantage point like the peak of the mountain she lives upon. From here, Eleanor can look back at the valley of her past, but it looks so small now. The details of the roads, the twists and turns, the sharp rocks, they are all smoothed over by distance. Tonight, a heavy snow is falling outside. It is the kind of snow that falls in the deep of winter, thick, heavy flakes that absorb all sound. They stack upon the roof, upon the pine branches, upon the frozen ground. They are wrapping the world in a blanket of pure white silence. Eleanor rests her head against the back of her chair. Her hands, weathered and mapped with the veins of a long life, rest still in her lap. The people in the village and even her distant relatives who occasionally write to her often worry. They send letters that say, "Eleanor, come down. It is too lonely up there. Come live with us. There is still time to be part of a family." They mean well. They think that happiness is found in noise, in gatherings, in the clutter of human connection. They cannot understand that she is not empty. She is full. She thinks of the prompt, from the prompt of her life, that young man, the professor, the letter. It feels like a story she read in a book 1,000 years ago. The pain of it has not just healed. It has vanished. It has been erased. In the prompt of her life, desires were once loud. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be a wife, a mother, a poet. But living here in the shadow of the eternal mountains, those desires have slowly evaporated like morning mist under the sun. What remains when desire is gone? Peace. Absolute, unshakable peace. She realises that she hasn't felt lonely in 40 years. How can you be lonely when the wind speaks to you? How can you be lonely when the Creator is present in every beam of light and every shadow? She slowly pushes herself up from the chair. Her movements are slow, a fluid negotiation with gravity. She walks to the window one last time tonight. She presses her hand against the cold glass. Outside, the world has disappeared. There is only the white swirl of the snow in the darkness. She looks towards where the sanctuary stands. She cannot see it through the snow, but she feels it. She knows it is there, her little wooden mosque of the mountains. She spent her day there today, as she does every day. She sat on the rug, counting her breaths, repeating the holy names of God, the names of peace, of mercy, of light. There is a phrase she loves, to die before you die. It doesn't mean physical death, it means the death of the ego, the death of the I that wants and needs and hurts. Eleanor feels that she has achieved this. She is no longer just Eleanor, the woman who was rejected. She is part of the mountain. She is part of the snow. She is a vessel for the divine silence. She turns away from the window. It is time to rest. She moves to her small bedroom. The room is simple, a bed, a small table, a lamp. She changes into her nightgown, the fabric soft flannel against her skin. She unpins her hair, letting the silver strands fall around her shoulders. She brushes her hair, a rhythmic, soothing motion. Stroke down, stroke down. With every stroke, she lets go of the day. She turns down the covers of her bed. The sheets are cool, promising a deep, dreamless sleep. She climbs into bed and pulls the heavy quilt up to her chin. The weight of the blankets is comforting. It feels like a hug from the earth itself. She lies on her back and stares up at the wooden ceiling beams. The firelight from the other room casts long, dancing shadows that play across the wood. She takes a deep breath. Inhale, drawing in the stillness of the cottage. Exhale, releasing her spirit into the care of the night. She thinks of the village far below where the lights are going out one by one. She thinks of the cities further away where people are rushing, worrying, planning. She sends a silent prayer of peace to them all. May they find their own mountain, she thinks. May they find their own silence. Her eyes begin to close. The lids feel heavy, so wonderfully heavy. The sound of the wind outside has changed. It is no longer a whistle. It is a hum, a deep resonant vibration that seems to rock the house gently. Oh, rocking. She feels the boundaries of her body beginning to dissolve. Where does Eleanor end and the bed begin? Where does the bed end and the house begin? Where does the house end and the universe begin? It is all one. The hate she once felt is not even a memory. The love she once sought is everywhere. It is in the dark. It is in the quiet. She is serving God simply by breathing in, out. She is serving the universe simply by resting. The darkness of the room is velvety and soft. It is not scary. It is the womb of creation. It is the place where all things return to be renewed. Eleanor's breathing slows down. It matches the rhythm of the snow falling outside. Soft, slow, soft, slow. She is floating now, floating on a river of stars. The cottage anchors her, but her spirit is free. She has kept her promise. She never married a man, but she married the infinite. And it has been a happy marriage, a marriage of 60 years of peace. The fire in the other room gives one last pop and then settles into ash. The light fades, and Eleanor drifts. She drifts past the memories of the university. She drifts past the letter. She drifts past the building of the house. She arrives at the centre, the quiet centre. And now, my friend, it is time for you to join her in this quiet. Imagine you are in that cottage. You are safe. You are warm. The snow is insulating you from the world. There is nothing outside that can reach you. You are wrapped in the same peace that Eleanor found. You have no desires right now. You have no needs. You have nowhere to be. You're just here, existing, breathing. Let your body become heavy like the logs of the cabin. Let your mind become clear like the mountain air. Let your heart become quiet like the winter snow. The story is over. The journey is done. The silence is here. Listen to the silence.